So I want to talk to you guys today about Colby Covington. At one point, Colby Covington was one of the most talked about guys in the UFC. He was known for talking a lot of trash and for really just irritating his opponents. But even with that, said Colby Covington was a top welterweight contender at one point in his career. Colby Covington was an excellent collegiate wrestler and an NCAA All-American at Oregon State University. So he wasn't just a guy with a big mouth. He put the work in, and you can't take that away from him, no matter how much you dislike him. Colby Covington made his debut in the UFC back in 2014, where he actually got his first win via TKO against Wang. He went on a 2-fight win streak with his next win against Wagner Silva by rear naked choke, then followed that with a victory over Mike Pyle by unanimous decision. But at his second pay-per-view appearance, he suffered his very first loss against Alves by guillotine choke. After that loss, Colby Covington redeemed himself and ended up going on a 7-fight win streak. He racked up a lot of solid wins against standout names like Dong Hyun Kim and Demian Maia. Now the Demian Maia fight was where he really made his presence known. Overall, the fight was decent, but this was the one where he opened up Demian and had him leaking all over the octagon. I want to say this is where his villain arc was created. Brazil, you're a dumb, all you feel the animals suck. This is where he made a name for himself among those who maybe didn't know who he was. After beating a jiu-jitsu legend like Demian Maia, he goes on to UFC 225 and takes on Rafael dos Anjos, who he defeats by unanimous decision. He won the interim UFC welterweight championship, and typically after you win the interim championship, you eventually face the current champion. But Colby ended up getting injured and had to relinquish that interim title. After recovering from the injury, he came back a year later to headline a UFC on ESPN event, taking on the legendary ruthless Robbie Lawler. Of course, at this point, Robbie Lawler is past his prime, but still a fighter who could put on a great performance. Regardless, Colby Covington goes in there, does what he does best, and puts on a pressure and pace that a lot of guys have trouble with. That's exactly what he did to Robbie, pressuring him, taking him down, smothering him, and not doing too bad on the feet. There was a point in the fight where Robbie did tag him, but it just wasn't enough, and Colby Covington ended up getting the unanimous decision. That win right there got him his very first official title shot against Kamaru Usman at UFC 245. The Usman-Covington beef was probably one of the funnest beefs to watch back in 2019. Lots of trash talk, obviously, from Colby. Covington finally got to clash in Vegas at UFC 245. It was an excellent fight, and definitely delivered on both ends. The fight was going back and forth with lots of inner pocket exchanges until that 5th round when Usman busted Colby open and ended up dropping him. Usman actually did some damage to Colby's jaw, and the fight ended up being stopped by TKO punches. But Colby put on a war with Usman. It was an absolutely excellent fight. After that fight, once he healed up, a year later he comes back and takes on Tyron Woodley. The fight almost went the distance until Tyron got injured, and with that victory, Colby Covington is right back in the title shot. A year later he faces Kamaru Usman again for the welterweight championship. He ended up losing again to Kamaru Usman, but this time it went all 5 rounds. After this fight, a lot of people felt like as long as Usman was the welterweight champion, Colby Covington would never get another title shot. So it became hard to sell the fans on Colby fighting this guy again, and possibly winning. It looked like at this point Kamaru had Colby's number. But with all that being said, Colby still had the interest of UFC fans. While beefing with Usman that entire time, there was another beef building up behind the scenes where Colby was taking shots at Jorge Masvidal, a former training partner, teammate, a former roommate, a former friend of his. And so at UFC 272, Colby's second grudge match took place, where he took on Jorge Masvidal. This actually won fight of the night, because it was a great fight, and it got kind of scary for Colby at one point when Jorge landed a beautiful shot that rocked Colby and dropped him. All credit to Colby, though, he was able to take that shot and keep pushing through it. He ended up winning by unanimous decision. Once again with that win, Colby was still in limbo. He was in a weird place because Kamaru Usman was still the current welterweight champion, and there was no chance in the world that Colby was going to get another title shot. Later that year, Kamaru Usman was defending his belt against Leon Edwards at UFC 286, and Leon shocked the world when he KO'd Usman in the 5th round, a fight that Usman was pretty much handily winning until that 5th round head kick landed. With that victory and that title change, somehow it put Colby Covington back in title contention, because now Usman was no longer the champion. This was a fresh opponent that Colby had never faced before. But obviously, since Kamaru was the reigning UFC champion, it was only right that he got a rematch even after that KO. So Colby decided to wait it out. He decided not to keep fighting and not risk losing and not getting another shot at that welterweight championship. Obviously, if Colby had kept fighting and winning, he was just solidifying his position, but it was also risky. So he got a lot of flack for this. He waited a year sitting out. Leon Edwards ends up beating Kamaru Usman once again at UFC 286 by majority decision. At the end of the year, Colby Covington got his wish, where he took on Leon Edwards for the UFC welterweight championship at UFC 296. Sadly for Colby Covington, he lost by unanimous decision once again. So we're talking 3 title shots and Colby Covington fails to grab it. 3 title shots against 2 different opponents. After this loss, Colby Covington kind of went into this weird place where he vanished again for an entire year. You'd see him doing everything but fighting. You'd see him tweet, out gambling, doing everything but fighting. But Colby did return in December 2024, literally just under a year later, where he headlines UFC on ESPN and goes against Buckley. Unfortunately for Colby Covington, it did not go his way. Colby was being highly criticized for fighting guys who were much older or past their prime, like Robbie Lawler, Demian Maia, or Rafael dos Anjos. When he took that long break waiting for the title shot, he had other contenders he could have easily matched up with. I remember one name that was thrown out there was Khamzat Chimaev, and clearly Colby